next presentation that I was thinking about, of course, we see quite often openEHR working with FHIR or along FHIR or next to FHIR. Quite often, as vendors, you have to deal with multiple data sources, and FHIR is always present when it's about openEHR. And some of the vendors already implemented different mapping technology or mapping tools so that we can have conversions in both directions. And Matija from Better is going to present their view about that. Hopefully, one day it's going to be a basement for some standardization in openEHR space. So thank you, Matija.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So good morning in my name as well. I'm Matija Polajnar from Slovenia. I've been with Better for almost a decade now in various roles, all openEHR related. I don't have such interesting slides. I'll scare you with some YAML and JSON. And I'll be standing here behind the podium because I like to take risks, so I have a live demo afterwards. I'm also a member of openEHR Specifications Editorial Committee, which I hope goes to show that I believe that openEHR is the best standard to persist clinical data. Now, that said, I have FHIR on my slide, so and it doesn't want to go to the next slide. You've seen something like this in a keynote slides. It's from different source, it's slightly different, but so yeah, FHIR gives a lot of promises, right? And it's easy to adopt. It has a nice API that was, as I believe, first meant as a facade for various applications. In whichever format they choose to store the data, they should expose it through that API. It can be used in integration patterns, and lots of people also choose to store data in this representation. That comes with a set of challenges that I'm not going to address today, but needless to say, it's quite a popular standard for application development, and it has a rich information model, unless you want to tackle the fine details, right? Because it defines all the clinical concepts within the standard itself, and it doesn't really do the maximal dataset modeling like the openEHR does. And then you can also do some modeling yourself with profiles and add extensions, which then bring you to the interoperability problems. But like I said, it has a nice API. On the other hand, openEHR has this maximal dataset modeling approach with archetypes, which are publicly available. On the API front, it has a well-defined API. It also has a query language. With the things that have come from the industry, like Birger mentioned before, the simplified data formats that are going to be standardized any day now. It makes it easier for the developers to deal with the data because the raw format that the openEHR specifies is quite complex. So in practice, applications are often not using that. But still, you can see that on that front, openEHR maybe is not as strong as FHIR. So it would be nice to combine both. Also, not only for that reason, but also because in the existing ecosystems, we often find that FHIR is already used. And also at Better, where we really believe that we should use openEHR for clinical data, and we do that without exception, we use FHIR to persist other kinds of data, like was mentioned before. So demographics could be stored in openEHR as well, but we use FHIR for that. But the operational data, the encounters, the billing stuff, the organizational structures, care plan definitions, things like that. And that's all well and fine, but like it was mentioned, I think, many times this morning, you often find a need that you want to expose the clinical data that's in openEHR through a FHIR API. And we've come to that need maybe 5 or 6 years ago already, or even before, but 5 or 6 years ago, we had an attempt of solving that in a general sense, so not by programming or scripting each and every integration, each and every mapping, but to have a declarative way of doing that. We had a product back then that we have since discontinued, but it fared quite well in the limited use case that it was intended to tackle. And that was to expose for reading only the clinical data from openEHR through FHIR API. So it enabled both GET requests and as well as the search API from FHIR in a limited way. But the idea was to write some kind of a YAML mapping. I'm not going to go through this. This is just an example. But those of you that are familiar with AQL, the query language of openEHR, you might spot some AQL-ish patterns in there. That was by design so that we could support transformation of search API requests into AQL, and then we transformed the results on their way back into a bundle of FHIR resources. This had a number of shortcomings, one of which was that you did this per template, and then each and every time you were dealing with the same kind of stuff, with the same kind of archetypes often even, so we were really repeating a lot. Also, we couldn't support writing because it was not bidirectional. And yeah, it was really a lot of work, and nobody likes to write mappings, right? So neither in code or in a declarative way. So now, for the past 2 years, we've been working on a new approach. And I'm not here to sell you the product. I'm here to actually invite you to some kind of collaboration because we have figured that most of the repeating work comes from mapping every time the same kind of general archetypes into FHIR resources. So if you think about it, you have published archetypes in openEHR, and you have like an open standard definition of FHIR resources. Wouldn't it be nice if you also had some kind of mappings between them that were done once by somebody and then published, and then you could reuse it? So that was our thought. We should split the mappings into 2 layers. One would be the model mappings to deal with this kind of mappings, so archetype to resource. And it would follow the same maximal data set approach as the openEHR archetyping does, so map as much as you can, as much as it's possible. And then, of course, because in the real use case, you're dealing with openEHR templates and FHIR profiles and specifics to your application, that would be another layer that would be bolted on top of the model mappings, and that obviously would have to be done per use case. So that was our idea. We wrote an initial proposal of a specification for that. We open sourced it, and the idea is to maybe even have competing implementation, but mostly to have reusable model mappings. It's intended to be bidirectional, so you could also support write requests or any other integration flows. It is obviously domain specific, which limits it not only to healthcare, but specifically to openEHR and FHIR. But that also comes with a set of advantages, like you can have specified fixed mapping of data structures. You don't have to go in your mappings all the way down to primitive values like strings and integers. You can deal with, I don't know, quantities, for example, and nicely map that between openEHR and FHIR. Yeah, so on the context mapping level, what you also should have, but you might notice in the demo that it's not there yet, all the specifics you should be able to express that. So specifics about the template and the maybe the profiles that you use. So the spec is published here on our GitHub page, so you can take a look at it. I think the slides will be available on the openEHR site, so you'll be able to see that. And now let's do a demo. Hopefully it will go through well. We'll be dealing with a really simple case. Also, the mappings will not be the best, but I've been trying to keep them simple so that you'll be able to follow it. We will be working on this template. It just uses 3 archetypes to express like a data point for a growth chart, which measures body height, body weight, and head circumference of a patient. And yeah, I have an instance of the so-called FHIR Connect core, yeah, which I might have neglected to mention. At least our vision on how to approach this, and we did this way, is you would have a core that would deal with these data transformations, and then you would have various adapters on top of it, which would, for example, have a FHIR facade over REST exposed and use the core to transform the data, but you would have a FHIR API, or you could have adapters for various integration engines and stuff like that. So I have just a core here to transform the data. I need to let it know the template that we will use, so I will post the operational template to it, which it gladly accepted. And now let's take a look at one of the mappings. So it's declarative, it's not scripting. That is by design for various reasons, but one of them might be that programmers don't like to do mappings, right? So it would be nice if we could find other people to do this. Sorry? Hard to read. Oh, it's quite good from here. It works on my computer, yeah, exactly. Slightly better, right? Okay. So what I express in this mapping here is that on the FHIR side we will have an observation. On the openEHR side we will have the archetype for the body weight. So this is a body weight mapping. And like I said, this should be a maximal data set mapping, and it's not. It's really kept simple, just to 2 attributes, or maybe 3, depending on how you count. So this is just a descriptive name, has no influence on how the mapping works. But what we say here is that we will map the value of the FHIR resource, so from or to, depending on which way we're going, to this path. And this is a web template path, so part of the simplified data format standard that's not yet published by the openEHR, but it's being somewhere in the work. And both of those are of type quantity, so that means a DB quantity on openEHR side or a quantity in the FHIR side. But we will only do this, we will only choose this mapping if the observation on the FHIR side matches this criteria, and that is that its code is one of those. Those are the Loink and SNOMED code that denote the body weight. Or when we're mapping in the opposite direction, so from openEHR to FHIR, we will put all of those codes into the observation code. We will also map the time from event time on openEHR to effective in FHIR. And yeah, we should do more probably here, but we kept it simple for this demo. So let's post all of these low-level mappings, and here is the context mapping that just defines that whenever we're dealing with the growth chart operational template, we want to use mappings for those archetypes, and the result when mapping into FHIR or source, if we're mapping in the opposite direction, will be a bundle because this results in multiple FHIR resources. So what we did now is actually set up, what it was before was an empty shell, right? This software didn't know how to do any mappings, and now we actually gave it instructions on how to map this particular example. And this, for those of you that have worked with openEHR, this is a flat JSON type composition, so it's a simplified data format again, and this is a composition that contains a body weight of 10 kilograms and the height of 75 centimeters and also a head circumference. And if we send this now to the FHIR mapper, and it needs to think about it because it's the first time it's done this, it results in 3 observations. So one with this Loink code, and this is apparently the body height, and then another one that is the weight, and another observation that is the head circumference. Let us now take this this bundle of 3 resources into some kind of a FHIR server that can do validation, and we'll see that actually it is a valid bundle. It does give some warnings. One is that we should have a narrative. Yeah, probably we should map that from somewhere, but we didn't really have that on the openEHR side anyway. It says that it should have a subject. It's apparently a warning in the FHIR specification that all observations should have a subject. We'll discuss that in a minute. And it should also have a performer. And then we get the same warnings all over again for the second and for the third resource. We can also convert in the opposite direction. So here I have actually an example from the NICTIS site, an instance of an observation following the Netherlands core body weight profile, and it's it has 2,400 grams in the value and lots of other values which we did not touch in the mapping, so we'll not get those. But what we get as a result is, again, a flat JSON composition that this time only has the body weight, because that's what we've given it. And yeah, we should probably do something with the unit. Now, like mentioned, we... how am I on time? I think I can take a minute or two more. The profiling thing, we have to put some more work into it, and now would be, so not necessarily today, maybe in the near future, I'll give you my email, would be the time to give your suggestions, but we should put the FHIR profiling thing somewhere into the context mapping arena. We have not done that yet, so we can modify the model mapping. That's not ideal. That's not what you're supposed to do, because the model mapping is supposed to be general, right? But we can put the profile value in there as well. So if I just say that into the meta.profile, we put this Netherlands core body weight profile, it will be referenced from the resources then. So let us just do that for all the three model mappings. So now we have this profile in all of them, should have. Let's remap, and yeah, here it is. So observations now are also tied to a profile. If we validate them again, we'll see that we get the same set of warnings, but then also a set of errors, because Netherlands core profile apparently required you to fill in the category field, and it elevates, oh, this is also about category, it elevates the level of the subject requirement to an error, so you're actually required to have a subject on observations, which makes sense, but it also makes sense that this core transformation did not put the subject in there, right? You're supposed to have an adapter bolted on top of that would use this transformation from the core, but then resolve your patient from your FHIR server or whatever you have your patients, and put a reference into the observation. Yeah, and we could also modify now the mappings to resolve that category issue, but I don't think that's so interesting. So, to get me back to the slides. This is going from the beginning now. No, it's not. Yeah, this is it. So let's have some questions if you have any.
Hey, you showed the mapping from openEHR data to a bundle. I think templates maybe many times also can be translated to like a questionnaire. Is that possible too?
Yeah, I mean, it was transformed into a bundle of observations in this case. You could obviously have model mappings that would map to questionnaires. I'm not sure whether that would work yet, but ideally, obviously, that would be the approach.
Okay.
Can you also perform file searches with these mappings?
Not yet, and also this is not would not be part of the core, but we have thought about it. Yes, so that would be an adapter that would expose a FHIR facade that would also support the search. During design phase of this mapping specification, we have thought about that, so we are confident we can pull that off.
Okay, thanks.
What about a change in the FHIR resource or change in template of openEHR? And in what can you automate some process?
Yeah, right now we are tied to a single FHIR version, admittedly, which is R4, which is the one that was published when we started. You would have to have separate model mappings for separate FHIR versions. Also, by the nature of how things go in openEHR, you would have a separate version of the archetype, and the version of the archetype is part of the archetype ID, so that would be a separate mapping as well. So yeah, it would not help with this. Although, obviously, you could reuse the old mappings, it would be almost the same, but here you would have to do your own mapping. No more questions? One more. Two more. It's hot topic.
Thanks for that once again. As usual, stellar work. I'm just trying to understand how the capability to do the mappings in the way you've done fits into the the usual big picture of running the whole thing, the platform itself. So one of the things that happens to us quite frequently is just you have some FHIR resource and it comes in and it is in various implementations transformed to openEHR before being persisted, and sometimes you end up with 1 to n relationships because of the FHIR resource and the information based on what the clinicians do on the openEHR side being distributed into multiple compositions. So have you encountered that, or do you have any kind of 1 to n situation in the mapping?
So when you have one FHIR resource
ending up with
in multiple compositions,
or more than one composition?
I don't think we've come across that.
Yeah,
because usually the FHIR resources are more granular than
yes. And as I said, it depends on what the clinical modeler did. So sometimes they make interesting choices, and as a technical side, we try to accommodate those. I was just wondering if that came.
No, we haven't stumbled across that. If you have any examples, I would be really glad to see them.
Yep,
Here's my email.
Catch up with you. Yeah. No, about it.
And also, if you'll have the time and willingness to look at the mapping spec, you might have some proposal on how to accommodate
we
that.
have a SEC meeting soon, don't we? So
yeah.
We'll see. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, hello, Matija.
Matija.
I will ask something. Yeah.
Hi.
So first of all, what if I want to output a panel of observations? So not just single resources in a bundle. For example, I have a blood gas analysis, and I want to have it as a panel. So it's obviously the analysis has several resources that are referenced by it. Yeah. Is there a possibility to transform the composition to such a linked bunch of resources?
Yeah, the core does not deal with that. So we would have to, maybe it would be a custom adapter if it's a really custom case.
Yeah, I mean, they could also deploy an ETL doing that after the bundle you provide.
Sorry, I didn't get
I just said, even though if you don't do it, there could be an ETL taking the bundle and putting it into a linked set of resources. And
yeah, but probably it depends on how you want them to be linked. So it's kind of specific. Right now, this core part of the mapping does no references whatsoever. Okay, that's a neat idea. Maybe it will be useful.
Yeah. The second question is more simple. It's one of, I think, the things that haunted me the most doing FHIR mappings. How do you deal with the crazy amount of data absent reasons? And how do you, at what moment do you decide that the mapping you're currently having, given the amount of data absent reason, creates totally empty data? Do you have some restrictions for that? For example, I had a vaccine from a source system that neither had a date, neither had a vaccine. It literally had nothing except for a subject. So do you have guidelines to say, okay, if that amount of data is missing, actually, we don't even want to process that? Did you thought about that?
Well, no, we don't have that bad data.
It will happen.
Yeah. So now this depends on what you're doing exactly, which direction and what you're trying to do with it. But if you would transform it to a open-air composition and post it into a CDR, you could decide on the template level which you want to reject, right?
And
Sorry? But I think you can insist on having a value.
there is also validation rules on the template, so you can validate data on the template level. Say from openEHR perspective is not valid enough, and then you have to take some decision on that. One more question?
Hello, I just started to learn about EHR last month, so I'm quite new in the field. And I'm a bit stuck in the creation of composition, and I'm wondering if it's better to do that with Java classes or maybe web templates. If you have any advice on that, would be great.
I would prefer web templates. So I'm not really familiar with how other implementations are doing. I'm with Better, and we actually have an endpoint that produces an example of a composition. So that definitely I wouldn't propose to go through the FHIR.
That example is on the roadmap of the specification for the next REST API specification. So it's becoming eventually standard in openEHR.
So they'll actually be able to get a JSON that has dummy values in it, but then you just know which to replace, and it makes your life easier.
Yeah, I think, thank you for the presentation.